Well, tonight, Donald Trump, who is a self-confessed insomniac, even before he became a criminal defendant, will be struggling to fall asleep with two frightening words stuck in what's left of his mind: insider witness. This is one of those nights when we have had to throw out and rearrange much of what we were going to be presenting to you tonight, because we have had breaking news on top of breaking news. And apologies to the guests who we had to pass by tonight and reinforce with extra lawyers. There's Clarence Thomas financial scandal, which was bad enough this afternoon, and it got worse tonight with Kellyanne Conway revealed to be a secret conduit of money directly to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's wife. And remember, Clarence Thomas's wife's income is Clarence Thomas's income. And then defendant Trump had another bad day in court in E. Jean Carroll's civil lawsuit accusing him of rape. Donald Trump lied to reporters on a golf course in Ireland today, claiming that he was rushing back to New York to testify in that case at the very same time that his lawyer ended the defense case before it began without calling any witnesses at all. We will have more on both of those stories later in the hour. Donald Trump's possible future as a federal criminal defendant in investigations led by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith loomed larger today after the conviction on seditious conspiracy charges of 4 ringleaders of these so-called Proud Boys who organized the violent attack on the Capitol for Donald Trump on January 6th. At the end of the day, that left us with a difficult choice of which story to lead with: the latest in the Clarence Thomas scandal or the latest in Jack Smith's investigation of Donald Trump's attempts to overthrow the presidential election leading up to and on January 6th. And then, the New York Times broke the news that is our lead story tonight. There is an insider witness. The Times reports federal prosecutors investigating former President Donald J. Trump's handling of classified documents have obtained the confidential cooperation of a person who has worked for him at Mar-a-Lago. Multiple people familiar with the inquiry said the existence of an insider witness whose identity has not been disclosed could be a significant step in the investigation, which is being overseen by Jack Smith. The witness is said to have provided investigators with a picture of the storage room where the material had been held. The Times report tonight goes on to reveal much more than the existence of an insider witness. At least 4 more Mar-a-Lago employees have been subpoenaed, along with another person who had visibility into Mr. Trump's thinking when he first returned material to the National Archives. Nearly everyone who works at Mar-a-Lago has been subpoenaed, and that some who serve in fairly obscure jobs have been asked back by investigators. The Times also reveals tonight some of what Trump criminal defense lawyer Evan Corcoran told the grand jury when he was forced to testify under the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege, which forces attorneys to give testimony against their own clients when the clients may have involved the attorneys in crimes. Evan Corcoran wrote the document that was given to the FBI in June of last year, swearing that there were no more classified documents at Mar-a-Lago illegally in Donald Trump's possession. 6 weeks later, that document written by Evan Corcoran proved to be a lie when the FBI executed a search warrant and discovered thousands of government documents, including over 100 classified documents. 1 or more of those classified documents were found in Donald Trump's desk. The Times reports Mr. Corcoran testified that several Trump employees had told him that the Mar-a-Lago storage room was the only place where the documents were kept, according to people with knowledge of the matter. Mr. Corcoran testified that Mr. Trump did not personally convey that false information. Mr. Corcoran also recounted to the grand jury how Mr. Trump did not tell his lawyers of any other locations where the documents were stored. The Times is also reporting tonight another line of inquiry that prosecutors have been pursuing relates to how Mr. Trump's aides have helped hire and pay for lawyers representing some of the witnesses in investigations related to the former president. They have been trying to assess whether the witnesses were sized up for how much loyalty they might have to Mr. Trump as a condition of providing assistance, according to people briefed on the matter. Included in the New York Times reporting tonight is an item that seems to stand alone in the middle of the reporting about Donald Trump's possession of classified documents. The Times reports one of the previously unreported subpoenas to the Trump Organization sought records pertaining to Mr. Trump's dealings with the Saudi-backed professional golf venture known as LIV Golf, which is holding tournaments at some of Mr. Trump's golf resorts. It is unclear what bearing Mr. Trump's relationship with LIV Golf has on the broader investigation. Donald Trump's lawyers appeared to confirm to the New York Times the subpoenaed information about the Saudi golf tournaments. A spokesperson for Donald Trump told the Times that the investigation is, quote, a targeted, politically motivated witch hunt, and that Jack Smith is now using the inquiry to target Mr. Trump's business.